All right, I just woke up. Let's talk about the state of Overwatch at the end of November 2023. New patch coming up next Tuesday, a new director's take, and a lot of really interesting information. I want to talk about the meta right now. So we've seen a meta right now, which is definitely devolving and moving more towards spam. So let's actually talk about what is wrong with the meta. Is there even anything wrong with the meta? And I think that's going to take a little bit of explaining to do. Let me actually pull up my Epic Pen here, and let's talk about things. So why does the meta feel so spammy right now? Why does it feel so difficult right now? I think in general, I think a lot of people are negative about this meta right now. I think obviously there's a lot of Sigma being played because there's a lot of spam DPS. Dive DPS aren't very popular. There's a lot of Roadhog out there. There's a lot of poke characters, a lot of Baptiste, things like that. So let's talk about meta. First thing to know about meta is metas in generally are sticky. In other words, things that feel good or that are good generally stick around for longer than they ought to because people are more comfortable with playing those characters. In other words, we talk about a character like Yari, Bastion, Torbjorn, any of these characters that got recently pretty much gigabuffed or were broken. People are not going to be as reliable in terms of accurately reading how strong those characters are because they've been playing them for so long that they generally stick with those characters because they know how to play them. It usually takes either a slow change over time for people to find out what's actually meta, or it takes an overwhelming, serious, significant set of balance changes to make that character feel really bad, and all of a sudden people go opposite direction really, really quickly here. And I do think this upcoming patch is going to be a patch that does that for better or worse. I think relearning bad heroes is also something that's worth pointing out as well, where we look at a character like Bastion and a character that was almost not played at all prior to his giga buffs. And then even though he's received numerous nerfs, people are still realizing that, hey, this character is actually broken. In Bastion's case, I think maybe it's partly that it's sticky. People don't want to swap away from Bastion. But I also do think that the character was maybe a little bit underrated prior to his buffs, and that now that people were actually forced to play him because he was broken, people are realizing that, oh my gosh, this character actually has potential, and realizing just how broken that grenade, and even the ultimate can have. So I think that that's something that we have to consider, is that people have gotten pretty darn good at Bastion. And I think that's even starting to happen with the new Roadhog as well, as people have gotten better at the new vape change. It's going to be really, really, really strong. So I think overall right now we've seen a total dearth of dive characters, Winston, Wrecking Ball. Doomfist has been one of the few playable ones because he's more playable into spam characters. We've not seen a lot of dive supports, not as much dive damage, and certainly not as many dive tanks. So I think what's changed? Like, why has this meta shifted so much? Obviously, the key answer is Bastion. It has been Bastion for quite a long time. The character completely dumpsters many of the dive tanks. He does relatively well versus the dive DPS and dive supports. And even after his numerous nerfs, he's still good at what he does. And I think besides the cooldown change on his turret form, the turret still burns tanks, and it still burns tanks instantly. In fact, that's what made this recent change up to his spread so bad, because it prevented him from being able to poke out people from range, like giving him that flexibility, and made him just as strong. It was just as strong versus tanks. And I think that was the total wrong direction. The damage should have been nerfed. The spread should have been left as is, but they went the opposite direction with it. And we're going to see how that's a consistent theme with the Blizzard developers, where they see a character that needs to be changed and they change the wrong thing about the character. So obviously Bastion still murders tanks. That's part of the reason why we have the meta as is. I think also the popularity of Iliari and her release and how broken Pylon was on release really discouraged a lot of people from playing flankers, especially Tracer. Being able to 2-tap a Tracer with body shots is unbelievable. And even though this character is actually, I would argue, not super strong right now, she's still playable enough, and people still have the PTSD from trying to play Tracer into her, to where people have moved on from Tracer. And I think that's really hurt her position in the meta. Obviously, Baptiste is really strong, pretty strong versus flankers as well. He's not as strong versus a full dive composition, but he is pretty strong with his regenerative burst lamp and his weapon. That may change in the recent patch here. And then more than anything else, really recently, it's been the Roadhog change. Obviously, this character got slightly buffed, I think, at least with the vape change. And obviously, having a new ability does give him a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more flexibility here and there. But I've already given my thoughts on the rework. It's a total flop. The director's take talks a little bit about how, like, oh, the win rate's up, but we're not going to do anything here. But it's just classic Blizzard, where it's like the rework should never be something that's going to be increasing the win rate. If you want to toy with a win rate, you can just buff the old hog, right? But we didn't want that because the old hog was terrible to play versus, and the new hog is just as bad, if not worse. So anyway, poke is also generally, I think it's good to know the psychology of poke, where it's generally easier to default that in ranked because it doesn't require as much coordination. It doesn't require as much decisive action, and generally just kind of poking and inactivity and farming dopamine is always easier in ranked. And so poke heroes will always be more popular in ranked. It has been the case since Overwatch's release that poke characters, even if they weren't meta in the highest level, they were very, very, very meta in ranked, all the way down to bronze to GM. So something we should keep in mind. There will always be a poke bias. Okay, so I think it was Hawk tweeted recently something about power creep concerns of the recent patch. Those are fair. I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the patch note by note basis, but I do think in general it's partly true that we need to be focusing on avoiding power creep. We need to be addressing negative outliers first before we buff the floor up. Buffing the floor, like just introducing power creep introduces more issues than it solves. It's also a lot harder to balance because it's a lot hard to actually see like who's actually broken and who's not broken. And then we buff Sigma and then, oh shoot, we forgot about this character. And what ends up happening is that people get left behind. Heroes get left behind. And so we end up having to buff more characters than addressing the few outliers. Like right now, I don't even know what you do with Roadhog at this point in time. If you want my honest opinion, I think it'd be healthier for the game if they nerf Roadhog back to trash tier and just left the dynamics with his vape and his pigpen for, diehard Roadhog mains to have a little bit more fun with it. I think the character is fundamentally unhealthy for the tank role. Feels absolutely terrible to play. And as much as people complain about Sigma, there's a lot of counterplay around his abilities. And he feels a lot less worse to play into. I think Bastion, again, needs to be, until you rework this character, the way the turret functions, I think that he also needs to be nerfed, probably further, specifically his damage, to where his Bastion form doesn't just immediately melt people anymore. And I think that even looking at some of the support casts as well, is that I think we need to nerf some of the sustain, some of the potency of some of these cooldowns that the support cast has, as well as maybe taking a look at the support passive as well. I think that's my quick checklist of things that would immediately make the meta feel a little bit better. But we're going to talk about what they actually did really quick here. So I wanted to format this as the good, the bad, the ugly. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to shut down. And we're going to talk about each of these changes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And obviously, I assume there's going to be a couple other details on Tuesday, but I want to share my thoughts on what we have right here. So let's talk about the good to start off. So the first thing is that we're going to be making a general change to the amount of ult charge retained when swapping heroes, reducing it from 25% to 15%. We do like that the mechanic removes friction when swapping heroes, and we think that it should be 15%. However, there's perception it's almost always an advantage to counter swap upon dying. We're lowering this value to see its effect on swap rate. So this is crucial. So key thing is if you lose a fight in Overwatch 2, the first fight specifically, you go to spawn, you're going to swap to a new character. Generally, if you lose a first fight in Overwatch, you might have anywhere from 20 to 40%, and sometimes even more ult charge. But the old swap change made it that you lost very, very little ult charge, sometimes no ult charge, swapping to a new character after losing first fight. Unless you literally get picked out from spawn, you are going to be losing a significant amount of ult charge upon reswapping. And the crucial thing is it's not just denying the one swap, it's denying the 5 swap, 3 swap, 4 swap, 2 swap. If you go Winston on rollout and the enemy team swaps to Orisa, it's not the end of the world. If they go to Orisa, Bastion, Reaper, and so on, then that's kind of difficult. But if they do that now, they're setting themselves back a significant percentage of ult charge. I think this is fine. This number will probably continue to be tweaked, but I don't mind the idea necessarily. So that would fall into the good for me. We'll give this one I wish I had green here, but I'm going to give it a blue check mark here. So nice job. Love to see it. I think it's a good change. A couple of changes to Season 8. We released a rework Roadhog late in Season 7. Roadhog quickly became one of our top performing tanks with a win rate somewhere around 54%. That's just that should depress you if you read that. That should not excite you. That should actually depress you. There's been a lot of feedback around his kit, but we're going to hold off from making changes at the start of Season 8. Malga has had a lot of answers to Roadhog. We'd like to see where the meta sells a bit before we make the mid-season patch for any balance adjustments. Now, the funny thing here is that this actually shows a lot of maturity, but it's the worst time to maturity I've ever seen in my life. It's like a 5-year-old deciding that, I'm going to hold off when you really, really wish they would show the maturity in a much more, it's the worst analogy in the world. Anyway, we're going to move on. But yeah, this is something that they failed to do with Kiriko. I remember that there was a lot of concerns about Roadhog. I think they either buffed Roadhog or something happened. And what ended up happening is that the release of Kiriko just enabled the butt cheeks out of Roadhog. And so then now we had a buff Roadhog and a Kiriko that also enabled Roadhog more. So they failed to look at like the holistic, the overall environment. And it's funny that they're actually doing this now with the Malga release, where they're like, hey, let's hold off from nerfing Roadhog because we think Malga might be good versus Roadhog. I don't really have an opinion on that right now. But the irony is that they're doing it with Roadhog. Like, where was this in all these other situations? I screw Roadhog, honestly. Like, I don't care if this character's trashed here. But yeah, seriously, this is a big problem. Again, the idea of a rework should be to make what feels bad about the character when you're playing them feel less bad, and address what feels bad playing against that character, right? And so what they did is they made the character in some ways feel a little bit less bad with the vape change, but it only made it a little bit less bad, right? The character still immensely struggles versus spam damage, still struggles immensely versus anti-nade, is only slightly better versus anti-nade. And if you don't have the solutions, he's going to dumpster all over you, and he still feels just as bad to play against, if not worse, actually, in many ways. So it's just a complete flop of a rework. I'm not going to talk about it anymore because it frustrates me. Okay, so that is what I would say the ugly. It is not fundamentally bad, but the execution is concerning. Obviously, I think it's ugly because at this point, Roadhog is not going to get reworked. Let's be honest, guys. It's going to be as it is, but it's still disappointing nonetheless. So we're going to put it in ugly. All right, Doomfist. So times the Doomfist player uses his ultimate as an escape. It's a little disappointing to activate Meteor Strike and intentionally land on a health pack rather than enemy players. Starting in Season 8, Doomfist will now regenerate 75 health per second while in the air, or slightly increase the cost of the ultimate in order to compensate for the buff. So this is also falling into the ugly category for me. So I actually agree 100% with the logic, but you're going to notice a pattern here. I agree with the logic. I completely disagree with the execution. So it is true that landing on a health pack is such a lame use of Doomfist ultimate. It should be a kind of get out of jail free card that allows you to continue to your cycle. The problem is that this is very clearly too much. This is very clearly too much. I think that a nerf or a buff to around 40 to 50 HP generated would be a little bit more reasonable, because as it is right now, Doomfist is just going to sit in his ultimate and regenerate 300 HP over the course of that ultimate, if not more. I actually need to check the duration on that in a second. But regardless, that's not the direction that you want to go. That's too much in the opposite direction. It's too much. And so I think anyone looking at this right off the bat can already tell that this is too much. Like this is a good idea, but wow, we don't need to make it 75. Because I promise you guys, I would bet a lot of money that 2 weeks after this is released, this is going to get nerfed. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. If I'm wrong, okay, I'm not always right. But I feel like there's a very high chance that this is going to get nerfed immediately afterwards, which always begs the question, why are you doing this change then? Why would you not just make it a more reasonable number right now and then address it later? I think increasing the cost of the ultimate is not the direction you want to go. We don't want an ultimate that's harder to access. We want an ultimate that maybe is not quite so potent, but is available, frequently, right? I think, again, 40 to 50 is such an easy tweak to where it still does what you want it to do, but not quite so broken. Okay. And we got another ugly, guys. Tanks are supposed to take and create space, but when Ramattra's in his base form, they don't even say the right form, Omnic form, he can be a little too easy to ignore. So we're going to shift 100 of his health to armor, which I think is actually okay, reasonable, very squishy in Omnic form, as well as slightly increase the size and damage of his projectiles to see if it helps. So I appreciate the sentiment. This is something that if you guys are paying attention to the tank rework project I've been doing on stream recently, by the way, that video is going to be live in a few weeks. Stay tuned. Really excited for that one. You've noticed that the Omnic form is definitely something we've been putting a lot of attention into. It's not something that's very strong. It's meaningless in its poke, but I don't think the size and the damage of the projectiles is the direction you want to go. The problem with Ramattra is that it is hard to track moving targets or targets that are far away. Now, you might say, well, isn't the size the same thing? And I would say not exactly. The size makes it a lot easier to aim without as much thought. It's more easy to hit it almost accidentally just because of the size of the projectile. We need to increase the projectile speed where it actually rewards proper aim. Maybe not quite hit scan level, but it actually requires proper aim and doesn't just reward, oh, you just threw it in the general direction and accidentally hit them. And I actually am a little bit concerned about increasing the damage too much. Let's see how much they increase the damage numbers by, but this could be a little bit too much. I definitely think increasing the projectile speed is the way to go. And I actually don't mind the 100 health to armor as well. So I'd say overall, maybe a positive change, but it's not done very prettily. And it's not the way that I would change it. So, you're watching my video. You want my thoughts? I would say put this in ugly. It's not the ugliest thing in the world. It's about my level of ugly. But it could be better. So this one's a good one. And I'll talk a little bit about this one. Winston isn't the best matchup for other tanks. This is a part of his kit, but the disadvantage feels too extreme. And if you read this in my voice, you're like, oh, it's a Spilo video, right? Because dynamics and too much nuance and all that kind of stuff. And we like to alleviate that a little bit. Winston's Tesla armor's damage reduction. I think this is exactly what you want. I think obviously Winston is not going to all of a sudden be focusing tanks, but in circumstances when Winston needs to focus a tank or has to focus a tank or ends up accidentally focusing a tank or has to clear space or even in any sort of tank trade at all, this is going, even jumping a bastion, right, is going to feel better with this change. So Winston is not going to be a tank trader by any means, but it's going to make him a little bit stronger at the absolute worst part of his kit, which is if you understand like my philosophy here, is characters should have strengths and weaknesses. But characters should also have not extreme strengths and weaknesses because it makes them very tricky to balance. For example, Bash and Reap or Torbjorn are really, really tricky, really difficult to play around because they're so good versus Winston, but they are really quite bad in many circumstances versus other tanks. Now, Bastion, we'll talk about that. That's another story. But in general, Winston is definitely the most victimized tank. This changes that slightly, and I think it's a worthwhile change. And this is the kind of change that we need, right? This is the change where, okay, is it power creep? Maybe, yes. But it's power creep that addresses one of the outliers with this character, the weakest aspect of that character, or the too strong aspect of that character. And I think this is the type of change we want to see. So that's a good check mark for me. And off of that, we're going to move on to the bad. Recent changes, DPS heroes to start with Sombra. She's had a lot of moving parts. Recently, we feel like she's in a much better spot. Her win rate hovers between 45 to 48%, depending on rank. However, her ultimate is not as satisfying as it could be, so we're going to raise the ability lockout time of BMT to 1.5 to 3 seconds. No. You told us less CC. You said to our face, less CC, less hard counters, and you are doing the opposite. You've done the opposite with Cassidy's Hinder. You've done the opposite with May Freeze. You're doing the opposite with Sombra right now. You have not addressed this issue at all. This is not fun for the Sombra. The ability lockout is the least fun aspect of EMP. The damage itself is fun, and the old opportunist was fun. This is wrong. This is wrong. If you need to buff Sombra, the first thing you should be doing first off is dealing with the translocator. Again, the ability takes too long. There's weird bugs with the stealth. It also clocks off of walls, even when you're not even looking at the wall. There's a ton of quality of life changes you could be doing with that. And if you want a flat buff to EMP because you think it's too weak, fine. There's very simple ways of doing that. Leave it at 30% and give Sombra the opportunist damage boost back only on her EMP. Now, I believe that was 40% damage boost on targets that she's shooting. That's probably too much. What I would say is nerf that 20%. So anytime that Sombra EMPs, all of the hack targets during the EMP duration, which is what, 7 seconds, 8 seconds? She has the 20% damage boost versus. So that allows the Sombra to actually do something with the EMP without necessarily breaking the ultimate overall. Ability lockout is not fun at all. It feels terrible. The attack tank is going to die with this change, and that's going to feel terrible. And there's going to be very little, if no counterplay to this whatsoever. And this is also the least fun, as I said, aspect of it for the Sombra. The ability lockout doesn't feel good as a Sombra. It's just there, and it makes you feel like almost evil. So I don't, this is a bad change. Obviously, they're nerfing the 30 to 25%. But that, again, the ability lockout is way more important than that. Regardless of power spike, it's the least interesting aspect of it. So this is a huge miss from the developer team. And speaking of huge miss, this is another one. Now, this one, we talk about soldier statistics. He's a really well-rounded DPS. The self-stamation can be really difficult to deal with radius. So they actually, ironically here, they make a pretty significant nerf here, but they don't even talk about his win rate, which is unusual to me because I am curious about his win rate. Now, I'm going to cut them some slack. Let's assume that Soldier 76's win rate is too high here. Again, best case scenario on their end, it's still a bad change because it's a misread of what needs to be fixed. Rather than reducing the effectiveness of the heal, well, you screwed up. We'd rather open up larger windows of opportunity by increasing the cooldown from 15 to 18 seconds. The window was already broad. If we actually look at Soldier 76 here, let me actually pull up Soldier 76 on the wiki here. The window on a 15-second cooldown, let's actually pull it up really quick here. All right. It has a 5-second duration. The window is already 10 seconds when he doesn't have heal station. 10 seconds. The window is massive. The window is 2/3 of his uptime is not healing station. Increasing the window is not the solution. Increasing the window is the wrong. That putting an 18-second cooldown on a DPS hero is absurd. It is a total joke. The thing is it's like not that big of a deal, but it's totally tone deaf. It's like the old Discord range nerf when it was like, okay, it's really bad, but it's also just totally tone deaf. This is it really right here. I have no idea what the purpose of this change is. What they should have done, which we talked about on stream, is they should have left the duration as is, or even nerfed the cooldown to 12 seconds. Not the duration, the cooldown to 12 seconds, and then change the duration to 3 or 4. So it's a burst of sustain, but significantly shorter. Or even nerf the sustain. What is it right now? Is it 40 healing per second? Yeah, 40 healing per second. Change that to 30. Change it to 30 healing per second. All of this would have felt more fun, engaging for the Soldier 76 without giving him too much sustain in a 1v1. It would still allow him to be more self-sufficient. As it is right now, this is going to feel really, really bad for the Soldier. It's going to discourage a lot of off-angling. It's not going to discourage a lot of off-angling, but it's going to make it more tricky. And the effectiveness, the potency of the heal, if that's the issue, I think if anything, that was majorly the issue. The cooldown was not the issue. This makes me so frustrated. Like, it's a totally tone deaf change. An 18-second cooldown, guys. 18-second cooldown. This is not what you need to be doing with your DPS characters. This is the wrong direction. Okay. Does anyone remember how much damage Tracer's pulse pistols do? I won't blame if you do. We've changed them a lot. If you guess 5.5 damage per shot, you'd be right, but not for long. This is actually something for the Overwatch League players back in the beta were pushing for over and over and over again. They kept toying with the damage 5 and 6 and 5, and they couldn't decide. And the players were like 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, and they finally bit the bullet and do it. I think they didn't want to do an integer, a decimal point, but they finally bit the bullet and did it. And it was mostly fine, I think. But they're changing them back to 6 because Tracer's bad. But remember, why is Tracer bad? What is wrong about Tracer? Tracer's not gotten worse. The environment around her has gotten worse, and now we're introducing power creep. Now, if you've been paying attention, you may realize that Tracer actually got a nerf not too long ago. They changed a bug with her fall off and spread. And that was the nerf that she received, where I assume it was a bug, but she did a little bit too much damage in medium ranges. This is not the change that you want. Tracer already does a lot of damage in close ranges, but she struggles in that hybrid short to medium range, which is part of her character design, but also she's too weak at it now. And it's part of the reason why she really struggles in the meta that we're in right now. So if you want to buff Tracer, and you probably should consider it, considering that they offsetted the bug that kept her relevant for a long time, then you need to address the spread. Again, nothing significant here, but a slight nerf or buff to tighten her spread just a tiny bit in medium ranges would be all that she needs. She doesn't need more damage. She just needs more relevant damage in situations where she's too weak. So I think this will be okay. I think I won't put this one in bad. I'll put it in the possibly ugly. I will reserve judgment on this, but I think most people would prefer a spread change rather than just a flat damage buff here. Support changes. Brig here is going to get her whip shot nerfed from 80 to 70. Again, it's one of those changes where it's like, I knew it was coming. It was one of those buffs that just didn't make a whole lot of sense initially. And now they brought it back. And it's like, okay, well, I'm glad we went a ring around the rosy there. So that was good. The Baptiste ammo nerf, I think, is also very reasonable as well. A little bit less uptime in that damage. I think having a 45 ammo clip is pretty massive, so it's understandable here. And finally, the last good change here, we'll add a couple of check marks for those here, is the quick play lever. This one's pretty funny. People leaving over 90% of their matches. A lot of people are like, oh, it's just quick play. I should be able to leave whenever you want. Well, then why are you leaving quick play? If it doesn't matter to you, then why are you rage quitting the match? Grow up. So I actually think the lever penalty is really good. If you're leaving a quick play match, honestly, a Neanderthal is a compliment for you. Mouth breathers would be an upgrade. It's just bad. It's bad taste. It's bad form. It ruins the fun for everybody else. And a lot of times that most times I've had levers, people that join back in, it goes right in. We have just a fine time, but it's just absolutely obnoxious. You need to get over yourself. So I think anyone that's complaining about this change here with the lever penalty and quick play is just screw off. If you want to leave the game whenever you want to, there's custom games, there's arcade. Take your time in there. Quick play is something that people want to have a light version of competitive, and people being able to just leave and join whenever you want completely disrupts it and really ruins the experience. So overall here, I don't know what I'd necessarily grade this whole patch. I would say, okay. It's been better than some patches we've had in the past. I think for me, it's always about like the philosophy of behind the changes that concerns me the most. And I just hope to goodness that when we talk about things like win rates, we always ask ourselves, why is a character overperforming? and what aspect of the character is the least fun to play against or the least fun for the character himself, and we address that. Instead of buffing the lockout duration, let's deal with some of the translocator bugs that are super frustrating to play with as a Sombra, or give the EMP more identity instead of just flat out buff or buffing Doomfist ultimate, right? Is that too much? Is that too much in one direction? Instead of nerfing the crap out of Soldier 76 heal station, let's find out, is it the cooldown that's really the broken part? Like, is that going to feel good to play with? And I think like that we sometimes miss the mark with that. So anyway, enjoy, and we'll see what happens next week.